in these various settings, and I'm thinking maybe especially a general hospital, where chaplaincy might be available or is available to patients and their families, but there might be reticence because of the personal history, experience, and prejudices, if you will, that a patient or family brings to religion about engaging with the chaplain. Do any of you have stories about how people crossed that divide and were very thankful that they sought chaplaincy?
You know, this is what we do. All chaplains create bridges to people we've never met before, whether they're Jewish or Gentile. It really doesn't matter. One of my favorite stories is of a woman who happened to be Methodist in Northwestern Memorial Hospital in downtown Chicago. And she was coming in and she was going to have a biopsy and being very afraid for what that might portend. So we spoke several times that day before her surgery, and I asked her, what would this mean to you if you did have cancer? And she was able to respond that she hadn't lived her life the way she wanted to. There were things she wanted to do, and one of those things was opening up a bed and breakfast, despite the fact that she was a professor at the local institution. And the next day when the news came back that her biopsy was not cancerous, she realized that she had the freedom to take off in a whole new direction and to live her life the way she wanted to. So I think that sums up my efforts as a chaplain, to help people live as fully as possible, whether they're seniors, whether they're on hospice, or whether they're going through cancer or any other major disease. It's to be there with them and help them to make that choice.
Is there resonance, Rabbi Ozarowski, with the major themes of the high holidays, the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, with what Rabbi Schorin just described? In some respects, this notion of a decision being made of who is going to live and who is going to die, and yet in some respects, a sense of liberation around that. Do you see, how do these various forces work together in your experience in the minds of the people you deal with?
If I could reflect on a personal story where I was on the other end of this, my father died about 4.5 months ago. He was on hospice for 8 months before then, and so I was acting as his son and caregiver, commuting to St. Louis every other week, but also using some of the skills that I have picked up and the experiences that I've had as a chaplain. And he would frequently tell me, as a Holocaust survivor, having faced death many, many times, now he's facing it again. Every day is Yom Hadin, every day is the day of judgment for him. But on the other hand, he was ready for whatever awaited him out there. And so part of what I tried to do with him was to see what this all meant to him, helping him find some meaning and some hope. And I couldn't do it as a chaplain because I'm the kid, I'm the son. And yet I found that my work informed what I was able to do with him. And he actually was able to get what he wanted, to die in his home, in his bed, with his family around him.
And I guess this has something to do with attitude, and maybe your role to some extent is to help people find an appropriate attitude and one that serves their interests and desires and is in accord with how they lived. Have you had experiences where you find people learning a lot about life, Rabbi Griffel, even as they're facing death?
I absolutely have. I remember a patient who at first did not want the chaplain to visit, sort of as you were talking about before, and then she was actually convinced by one of the other members of the team to let the rabbi come and see her. And she spent most of our visit talking about how much she had learned during the process of her illness. The phrase that she kept using was, people keep coming out of the woodwork. And she was so surprised by this. It was a huge gift that she received right at the end of her life, and she was open enough to be able to receive it.
That's very powerful, really. The notion being that every opportunity that one has to take account, I guess, of life is a learning opportunity, which in some respects is like the message of the high holidays themselves, I suppose. As Jewish chaplains, you are dealt with a liturgy, a set of traditions, a set of rituals. I'd like each of you to reflect, in the context of the high holidays themselves, what of those rituals, traditions, prayers you found to be particularly useful as you work with patients and families? And starting with you, Rabbi Schorin.
Thank you. It's a great question, because there are so many ways that we work with people. I lead services at the Lieberman Center for Health and Rehabilitation. I teach classes, and I see the residents on an individual basis. So each informs the other. When I speak, though, of the meaning of forgiveness, of tshuva as the idea of repentance, or as we recently learned, of bringing things to consciousness that we haven't been quite aware of, I see my residents responding in a very beautiful way. One of my residents totally surprised me by responding beautifully by getting in touch with her ex-husband and saying to him that she needed forgiveness and she needed to grant him forgiveness. A beautiful idea of how to bring the holidays to life. But what I would stress with all of my residents, though, is that while when we're healthy we can say Yom Hadin and we can be concerned about the Roa Hagzera,
which is the
decree
stern
awaiting all of us.
decree. Mm-hmm.
I need to soften that a little bit. Mm-hmm. My residents' average age is 90. Mm-hmm. They deal with death every day of their lives, and it's all around them. I don't want to strengthen the punishing side. What I want them to know is that God is loving, that God is there for them, that certainly they will be judged with mercy. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a different take I do on the holidays, and yet everybody seems to get ready and be in an appropriate place for that.
And I guess, Rabbi Ozarowski, not everybody has the same faith, really. When we were speaking before, you mentioned some are beginning to think about a concept in Judaism that some may embrace and others not, which is ha'olam haba, the world to come, the notion of afterlife. How do you fine-tune your own response and how you deal with a particular individual based on your read of their particular experience and coupled with your own sense of what you think might be spiritually helpful to them?
I would start by saying, first of all, clinical pastoral education, which is the required training for professional chaplains that we all have, teaches us and trains us to be grounded in our own faith and yet work with a wide variety of people in a very non-judgmental fashion and style. We're not here to impose our faith. We don't proselytize. It's not an opportunity for kiruv, for making people more observant. That sometimes happens, but that's not what we do. It's not what we're here for. So that's the first thing. And yet there's a spiritual piece that may include faith, it may include observance, that we're all grounded in. I have one interesting case of a client that I'm seeing at the Healing Network, and this was a referral from her therapist who said there's a spiritual piece that he just can't help with. She needs a rabbi. Without going into the details, of course, the issue came from her parenting skills and from her own relationship with her own parents, and in the end, she feels that she's done some terrible things, and she needs forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And as I heard it, it's not that she did things that were so wrong or that she sinned, but I decided to try to share with her some of the classical Jewish material on vidui, confession, and forgiveness, which are high holiday themes, and see if she can't find a way to forgive herself. Mm-hmm. So we looked at Maimonides, the text of Maimonides on tshuva, on repentance and return. We talked about how she could confess to herself and offer herself forgiveness, with God and perhaps me being the witness to all this. And that was the way that we were able to use, that we're still able to use, themes texts, material that's in the context of Judaism in a therapeutic setting.